Alright guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Today I'm back in my old S-Class Mercedes. I'll be honest, I wasn't planning to drag the story of this car out for 3 episodes. I thought I'd summed it up in just 2. Part 1 gave you some background about the car and all of its flaws, and then in part 2 I went through all of my bills, some of which were eye-wateringly expensive. I think I summed it up by declaring that nobody should ever buy a cheap Mercedes under any circumstances, because there's no such thing. If you think it's cheap in the first instance, you'll end up spending twice that again just repairing it. So that was that, end of story. Or so I thought. Instead, it got creative and found a new way of extracting a 4-figure sum out of my wallet. I mentioned in the last video that it had this weird fault. It was only an intermittent thing, it didn't do it all the time, but you would start the car and then it would immediately die, so then you'd have to start it again and it would be fine. Now it did this initially, probably once every half a dozen times. So it was put down to a misfire on injector 3 and it had something to do with running the fuel tank low, so that didn't help. So after all the money I spent on it, I thought I'd cured that because although it still did it, it would maybe do it once every 20 starts or something. So I thought that was that. I thought I could live with that on such an old car. However, it didn't mend itself. It got more and more frequent. And also in addition to that, it developed a rattle on startup. So every time you started it from cold, you would get 3 or 4 seconds of metallic rattle coming from the engine bay. For many years, I always thought the timing chain was superior to a timing belt. I always thought after over a century of making the automobile, why would some manufacturers insist on using a glorified elastic band to control the engine's timing, rather than a metallic chain that would last the car's lifetime? You know, these rubber timing belts perish with age and need to be changed regularly. Absurdly regularly if you drive an Alfa. But I'm slowly changing my mind. You see, with a rubber timing belt, the cost of replacing that is usually around £300. And then then it's good for 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever the interval is. And once that job's done, you know where you stand. Whereas with a timing chain, they're not designed to be replaced, so it's always a massive job to replace them. In the case of most Audis, it's an engine out job because they position the chain right at the back of the engine. So unless you're a field mouse or a snake, you just can't get in there. So I took the car back to SPR Stockport, who rightly suggested that we replace the timing chain at a cost of £850, which I did, and now the car is perfect. It's never, not once faulted, and of course the rattle on startup's gone. But yeah, another £850. So hopefully now, with its new timing chain and tensioners, this will keep the S-Class on the road for at least another decade. It just means that my file of receipts for this car is getting almost as heavy as the S-Class itself. When I picked up the car from SPR, I was chatting with them, and he told me this was the 3rd S-Class Mercedes timing chain he's replaced this year. Now, I'd never heard of that as being a common issue, but apparently it is. What's strange though is that Mercedes use this engine in a whole host of cars, and I've never heard of a timing chain being an issue, but apparently with the S-Class it can be. So if you are in the market for one, just bear that in mind, because it's almost a 4-figure sum to repair. I think at the end of the last video I'd worked out that I'd spent about £2,500 repairing this car. So now I can add another £850 on top of that, which brings my total up to almost £3,500, which, if you remember, was the price I paid for the car in the first place. So now my very cheap Mercedes S-Class has now cost me the exact same again to repair it, which is just like my old M3. I've now spent 100% of the purchase price repairing it. But hey ho, c'est la vie, such is life, whatever other idiotic sayings people have. So there we are. At the end of the last video, I suggested you never buy a cheap Mercedes-Benz, and now of course I've got even more evidence for that. So thanks once again for watching. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll leave the link below. Yeah, if you've got any comments or questions, let me know and I'll do my best to get back to you. So yeah, cheers guys, I'll see you next time.